All right. I just want to hijack the stream and do another explanuary. I'm just going to move a cable and then I'm going to be ready for you. Let's see. So I was I recently got this Nifty Keys keyboard, and today I got the idea to try to use it properly to create a true polyphonic patch with 4 voices. And I think the name of this patch is going to be Dieter Dopfer was right. It's really cumbersome to do true polyphony in your rack. It requires a lot of modules, and my rack wasn't exactly built for it. So I've got a couple of corners. Some things aren't truly polyphonic, but it's a good start. So I have 4 voices that can play individually. I have 4 oscillators. Right now I'm actually utilizing the fact that the newest Disting EX update has an implementation of mutable instruments braids, so I basically set that up with 4 copies of the same oscillator with the same settings, and I plugged that into a VCA. And then I utilized the fact that I have Easter eggs modes stages as well, which allows me to get 6 copies of the same envelope out of it. So basically I can set, in this case, 4 different triggers, and they will all trigger the same envelope, but, copies of it. So you can sort of hear that it's not just one envelope, it's actually 4 different ones. And that's the sort of first complexity in this stuff, that you actually need a lot of the same components over and over again just for each voice. That's the envelope, definitely. You also need 4 different filters. You can mix them together. I did that in the first try, but I wanted to have 4 individual filter modulations as well. So I have tried to do that. It's not as good as I want it to be, but at least I have 4 different filters here. So I'm using my dual filter here from ADAC, and my WASP filter and my for low pass filter as well, and I actually wanted to just swap them in a moment, but the order is right now that the first 2 voices go into the dual filter and the last 2 ones go into the WASP filter and the low pass filter respectively. So that makes the 2 first notes relatively clean, and then you get some more noisy stuff in the 3rd one, and the 4th one is less noisy but also sort of interesting. So that's just the main part of it, and I'm also adding effects here, and that's one area that I'm really deviating from the polyphonic part of it, and a lot of polysynths do the same thing. I'm mixing all the waveforms together in a mixer and just putting it out into one mono signal that I'm then putting into my FX8 to apply reverb to at the end. if this was a true polysynth, I would then be able to trigger 4 different copies of the same reverb as well, so they would sort of space out individually, trigger when the node is triggered and have individual durations, which is really hard. I can at most right now muster 3 reverbs if I put 3 modules together, which is not quite enough to do this. I could try to repatch so I at least have 3 of them, individual ones, and the 4th node could be part of the other ones, or I can group some of them together. But it's also a little bit the problem here, because it's going to be a hodgepodge if you're going to mix and match modules. Ideally, you would have 4 copies of every module, except the envelope. You probably want to have 8 copies of them instead, because you want to be able to modulate them as well with a different envelope than your sort of trigger gate envelope of the actual key press, which I've also tried to do actually here. So in the bottom here, I'm trying to mold off the triggers from the keyboard into a different set of envelopes as well. I have the ST modular envelope here, and I have a dual envelope from Dofer as well here, and I have another the 4th envelopes up here, and in the one you strip, the mosaic one. And then comes another problem here, the fact that only 2 of my filters actually support multiple CV parameters in. So I can sort of, I've tried to mix together the various things I want to put into the filters for the dual filter that only has 1 CV in. And it's sort of okay. The other things I want to put into the filter cut off, other than just that new envelope I'm generating, I also want to pass along the velocity information from the keyboard, and possibly also the aftertouch stuff, which is really tricky to do as well, because also another one of the many drawbacks of doing this in modular, this keyboard here is monophonic when it comes to velocity and aftertouch, so I can't individually control the velocity or the aftertouch of each key press, which is a shame, but I guess some corners had to be cut. And this is actually why I wanted to just quickly try to swap around the order of the filters, because at least the 2 Doper filters I have a number of CV inputs. So if I could just make the order so that at least the first node would actually run through that one, then maybe I could just show you how the velocity and aftertouch stuff works. So I just have to think for a second here. This is the audio, swapping the audio. I also have to swap the outputs. And I also have to swap the modulation. No, I don't, because that's this and this. Well, I still have to swap that envelope. Must be this over here. And this over here. Hopefully I got this right. We'll see. Definitely not a lot happening right now, but let's try to turn off some of the CV inputs. So right now I have most of the CV from the velocity, and I have the envelope. Let's see if it's the right one. It is the right one. Then I have the aftertouch here, so if I turn down the envelope, yeah, here we have the aftertouch. So the velocity is how hard I press the key. And the aftertouch is what I do with it afterwards. Because I can sort of press down on the key. Yeah. Also, apologies for the fact that this sounds kind of screechy together. I'm trying to figure out what it is, but right now I'm blaming it on braids. The fact that I find it really hard to get just a simple waveform out of it. It's always some combination of waveforms melted together. Yeah, really tough to find a good patch there that actually does well polyphonically. If I had my way here, I would have like 4 signs out or something like that. 4 signs out would have been pretty great. Actually, there is a mode now that I think of it that might do this. And there is the harmonic oscillator, which is basically just a combination of sines and an additive synthesis instead. There's so many modes on braids, and I wish they were called something more sort of logical. I guess it is logical. A lot of them are just called like the waveform looks. The thing about harmonic oscillator, additive oscillation, is that I'm not sure how well it's going to work low pass filtered, because it's kind of East Coast meets West Coast then. We'll see. Yeah, that sounds better. A lot of, I mean, the good thing about using this sort of software version of Bratz, is I don't have to deal with tuning it. The disting module is just tuned by default, which is pretty awesome, because that would be another disadvantage of actually doing polyphony in Eurorack. You would have to tune all those oscillators, and if you wanted to have like sub oscillators as well, more stuff like that, then you'll really be into tuning stuff. So I don't have to do that here, luckily, which is really nice. But I do have to figure out all those filters, because all my filters are individual, and I kind of need to figure out what where my cutoffs need to be, and my attenuators and all that stuff. It's really hard with Well, it's another disadvantage because I kind of have to, trigger. If I wanted to do something with oscillator 3, right, I would have to trigger oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 first, because it's polyphonic, right? So figuring out how exactly I want oscillator 3 to sound basically makes me need to sort of turn the other oscillators off first. So here I'm trying to figure out why it isn't very velocity sensitive. So that should be the black cable here, which is CV1, which is the one I can't control. Yeah, that's better. So a lot of cutoff knobs that I need to make sure are exactly where I want them to be. Yeah, this one isn't very good either. Which one is that? It's this one. Yeah. Yeah, basically those two dual oscillators aren't going to be very reactive towards that velocity stuff, unfortunately. Or I could make them entirely velocity based. That would also be a reasonable option. So let's see, it's be this cable here. It's gonna be a cable madness if you're trying to replicate this. Basically what I could do, actually, because I have a lot of VCAs, instead of trying to mix together the waveforms, I could use the well, what I've basically been doing over here, and I acknowledge this is completely impossible to follow for anybody. Basically I've been trying to sort of mix together the velocity and the envelope that I'm triggering to the filter, where I instead could just VCA it. Basically, I could just use a VCA. So if I have my envelope here, I just stick it in a VCA, like this one, and I could use this one here, which probably needs a longer cable. No, that's fine. And then I can basically take this one into the cutoff CV. Yeah, that'll do. Let's hear how that sounds together. sort of. I wish this was polyphonic. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to do this quite a lot because it's a lot of patching, and it's a lot of suboptimal sort of components as well for this. I have been considering whether I should look into some of those for polyphonic modules that exist, because basically then I'll get the 4 identical filters, or I could get like the 4 identical oscillators with like one knob to control the same parameters. It could be interesting. It would be a lot of the synth that would go towards doing that. I'm very sort of drawn to polyphony in general in Eurorack. That's why I also have been spending so much time with the polycinematic and been investing so much in the Droid ecosystem, because basically I'm able then to, you know, do the same thing across the whole rack, including any polyphonic MIDI controlled module. But I definitely like having CV control of things much more than I like MIDI. It's been some interesting days before I got like the Rack Plumber, which is my latest module purchase here, which basically allows me to have, I can't remember, 17 or something like that, individual patch cables transported in this HDMI cable over to the other rack. Before I had that, I was doing it with MIDI, CV to MIDI and then from MIDI to CV again, and I had so many odd, weird troubles in that process, and I just basically, as soon as I had it like set up, I just saw how many issues I had with it. I immediately ordered that Rack Plumber interface here, just so I could avoid it. I mean, the only place I'm still gonna use MIDI to CV is probably with the BeatStep Pro I have set up here, because I can then just send nodes over the same MIDI channel and get 16 gates out, which I can use for all the percussion stuff, which is cool, and saves me a lot of patch cables for that. When it's just gates, it's fine. But other than that, being able to use regular Eurorack CV is just such a big advantage. You can really, I mean, the whole thing with MIDI is that it's really hard to decouple your pitch and your triggers. There's a node on and node off thing that goes with your gates. That means you can't really do things like, or it's really hard to do things like just having one thing that does your pitch and another thing that does your gate patterns. And if I could avoid that, I'd happily do it. It would really save my sanity, I think. So definitely, if I could compress the polyphonics setup into something that was practical to work with, I would definitely have that as a regular feature of my patches. Right now, it's hard to justify in this setup. I mean, I'm not using any of my voices right now, and I'm occupying 100% of all my envelopes and all my filters except for one. So it's not really a patch that I'm gonna keep around for long. Yeah, today's theme's why MIDI is complicated. Yeah, it wasn't made for Eurorack, that's for sure. Yeah, here we have the first issue with the way I'm using velocity, and why monophonic velocity is kind of shitty, because if I'm gonna sort of do a broken chord here, I can start it really nice, like this is a bright note, then my touch on node 2 is too low, so now the whole chord just changes down in volume. Then I can hammer node number 3 and everything goes up again. Yeah, not really nice. I could, I guess, with like 4 individual sample and holds, if I had that. I don't, but if I had that, I could sort of sample and hold the velocity aftertouch values, made sure they stayed the same until I hit the note again. I think that would be a workaround. But then again, I don't have 4 sample and holds right now. I have 1. Maybe 2 if I used what I have up there on the neutron. So that's not usable either. So I think I'd rather just decouple the velocity thing and maybe just have the aftertouch be a thing. That's the top ones here. This one. Gotta say, this rack plumber is pretty cool. Basically, it lights up if I've patched something in here and haven't patched it up in the other end, so I can basically check what jack I plugged stuff into here. That's pretty neat. What the hell did I... what did I do just before? How is this patch actually supposed to work? Let's see. This is voice number 1. Voice number 2 goes into there. This is supposed to be voice number 3. And voice number 4 is now completely uncatched. That's what happened. There we go. Nothing happening. And voice number 1 is this one. Or was it this one? This one. Why is my voice number 2 not working now? It's this one. It's not getting gates either. All right, I managed to patch things wrongly. That's also probably a disadvantage with polyphonic Eurorack setup. You might end up just not patching things the way you want to patch things. Let's see. So this is my number one, and see, this one has a, let's see, it goes over to what? Yeah, to this one. Then it goes over to this one over here, and it's also controlled. Have I swapped the inputs here? I might have. Let's see. No, I have not. Maybe if I swap these. Yeah. If somebody with a lot of waveform clue can tell me why my sort of chords sound sort of, it's hard to explain, but there's a dissonance in sort of the space between the waveforms. It's not as apparent here with the harmonic one because it's almost entirely sine waves. One of the cool things you could do if you have a fifth filter, which I happen to have as well, is that I can filter the entirety after I've filtered all the other ones, which I'm just going to try for the fun of it. So basically what I'm doing now is I'm adding a fifth filter to all notes instead of just, you know, the single note, or each note individually. Oh yeah, this is one of the gnarly filters. So why don't I apply an LFO to that, just to get some interesting stuff going on. With slower LFO. My voice number 4 is pretty silent. The cool thing about using filters on each, or the cool thing about using a separate set of envelopes on the filters as well, is that by adjusting the sustain stage, I can mix the nodes. Let's add some more effects. Oh yeah, I have lots of mixer channels left, so why don't I try to give them separate mixer channels instead. Ah, no. I can't, then I'll miss my lovely filter. That sucks. Maybe if I only filter 3 of them and pass the last one into the mixer directly, because I want to have that sort of fourth voice as a solo voice, if that makes any sense. Basically, I want to hold a triad in the left hand and be able to play a melody in the right hand. Oh, this is worthy of an LFO as well. See how that sounds. Now we're just jamming. better stop this before it turns out into a very avant-garde-ish patch. But it's been fun explaining a polyphonic setup to you guys at the Explanuary Modular. So thanks again for tuning in. And have a good one.